So anyway, guys, feel free to keep grabbing it. Hit from the like. I'd like to introduce Evgeny, who is the co-founder and CTO of DevOps Israel. Does a lot of very cool things with a lot of different CI and DevOps technologies. And an interesting guy to get a view with at the end of tonight's presentation. Evgeny?
Okay, hello everyone. I would like to talk about continuous delivery, or well, for those who know what continuous delivery is, this presentation is about the path going towards continuous delivery. It's a case study of what I have personally been involved with at Checkpoint for the last couple of months. It mostly talks about BitBucket and Bamboo. I hope you like it, so let's begin. What we're going to talk about is, as I said, BitBucket, Bamboo, and how actually the change that was done to the development group got implemented into the people's minds, like how they actually changed, how they used to do something, and now they're doing something else. I will not be talking about what they did before, because I don't know all the details, and it was ugly, so better not talk about that. So, let's start. What is the definition of continuous delivery by the guy who wrote the book? It's principles and practices to reduce cost, time, and risk of doing incremental changes to the software that services your users. Okay, so basically, you want to keep your software servicing your users and change it while it's running and without much downtime and all, and without like this whole orchestration of release management and these production releases being like a circus. So you want to go towards continuous delivery and learn about what it is and what are the principles and practices of it. So the great lords of Checkpoint have came to us and said, well, we want to do this. And said, okay, we did that with other companies. We know quite a bit about it. So we spent about 270 hours and 14 weeks. This is the actual graph of my time tracking doing this project. Okay? So at the beginning, of course, there was a lot more discussion and work. And eventually I got into like kind of support mode and fixing things. And in about 14 weeks, it was done, more or less. So step one. When I came to the company, there was already Bamboo, there was already several tools, and we had to upgrade them. So I came to the cool IT guy, and I said, okay, please upgrade this. And he said, well, I don't have time. And I asked nicely, he gave me permissions to log into the server. I upgraded to Bamboo and BitBucket myself. Step two. Let's understand what we are talking about when we're talking about continuous delivery. So the basic general principle of continuous delivery is creating a pipeline. The pipeline starts with team members who are using version control to commit their code. Then there's something that builds the code, preferably some automatic way to unit test deploy, and eventually decide that this is a good build and it should go to production. And we talk about the last bit at the end. So in the particular case of Checkpoint, it looks like this. They have their Jira. The developers are getting assigned with tickets, of course, or bugs. They're checking codes into BitBucket. BitBucket server is the new name for Stash. Bamboo is used to pull this code and create builds, and then eventually pushes that into Artifactory and into the production or staging servers. And of course, there's this Maven thing and a whole bunch of other stuff. So this was like the very, very high level way of describing what should actually happen. But the important thing was I was there about 2 years before, and I met with a person who works, who no longer works there, and we also talked about this. We did some work. I helped him understand the concepts and how stuff works. And he didn't really want to involve many people at the beginning. So he built everything himself and then he tried to dump it on people and say, okay, developers, now you work like this. And it didn't work very well. He got frustrated, he quit the company eventually. And 2 years later, they did want to get all of this stuff working, so they called me again. So, of course, once we agreed on the solution, how this should be how the small details should be worked out, we tried it. It didn't fit. I will go into details a bit later, but it didn't always fit, and we had to like fix things, change things, and because the people I was working with there had very open minds and they were like very trusting, this process went very smoothly, and eventually they got the better of it. So one of the things we did, we decided on the Git branching model. Some of you might know the Git flow or GitHub flow branching model. And here we just decided we'll have one integration branch. They will call it staging because their servers that this branch gets deployed to is called staging. And every developer working on a feature will have multiple feature branches. And eventually when their release engineers and QA will decide that this staging is something they want to release, they will promote that into production, and there is also some way to do hotfixes. Now, why is this good? So this has several advantages over the normal way of everybody works on the integration branch. First of all, many people can work simultaneously on different things and not hinder each other. They will not step on each other's toes, right? Another thing is staging always green. Staging is always ready to be pushed into production right now because nobody is pushing broken changes into it. We actually implemented enough checks and balances that will not allow any feature branch that is not built in Bamboo and successfully built to actually get merged into staging. It will just not work. Also, what they had before with one branch is they always had an integrated branch, and now they could choose when they want to integrate the change from the feature. So if they didn't want this feature, it could, like, even if it's green, it could live for a couple of weeks or whatever on this branch, and they could decide to leave it aside and not touch it, right? Makes sense, very easy. Many companies are not doing this simple thing, and they always have this drama about who broke the build again, and it worked on my computer, and why doesn't it work on yours, and etc., etc. Next step. We actually took the things that we decided and we talked to people. Talked to other team leaders, talked to other tech leaders, talked to other members of the teams, and tried to get their approval and their comments and their review. And as I mentioned, 2 years prior to this, we did not do this, and it was not very. Gave us a lot of feedback, good feedback. We fixed a lot of things, and it led to a better solution that is more acceptable to more people. And next step, and this is something that I have done at the beginning and all throughout the project, is document everything. Right? I use Confluence, of course, because they have Confluence, to write documents about what we are intending to do, what we are doing, what we did, and I try to share these documents for review with as many people as possible in the team. And this is extremely important when you want to make such a change. And of course, the most important thing is to actually do things, to actually implement all these changes I've been talking about, but I haven't said what they are. So, why this is here. Yeah, so you actually have to code this stuff up. So first of all, BitBucket. People use CVS. There was a team of about 50 developers who have been using CVS, and most of them are junior. They like finished their university maybe a year or 2 or 3 ago, and they need to learn Git now. And they're maybe not using Git at home for open source projects. So there was a learning curve there. They had BitBucket, which was not being used. We utilized this to host all their Git repositories. We did a couple of changes to BitBucket to accommodate the things I talked before, like preventing forced pushes on integration branches. I have a typo. Like setting a naming convention like feature slash is all the features, hotfix slash is all the hotfixes. We found a plugin for BitBucket that automatically adds reviewers to pull requests, and we asked all the developers to merge their changes using this pull request. Even though at the beginning, many people were not actually reviewing the code, eventually they started looking at the diffs like to make sure that it looks okay, especially the people that were automatically added. And of course, there's this tagging of successful deployments, which is that they will see the value of this in the future, but right now, I guess they don't understand why it's important. So how do you create a branch? You can create a branch from multiple places. You can create a branch from Jira. You can create a branch in your Eclipse. You can create a branch in BitBucket. When you create a branch from Jira or BitBucket, you can actually see the build status of the integration branch. You can see that the build in Bamboo is green. You have this naming convention that says if you are creating a branch from Jira, it will automatically put the title of your Jira as the name of the branch, which is very useful. You don't need to think of names. It's great for development. It will always have this feature slash thing because it's hard-coded in Stash. It's something you can just set up. And once you have a branch, as I said, in pull requests, you have reviewers. We found a plugin that automatically populates this field with the release managers that need to approve it. We made it so that pull requests will not get merged unless there are like 1 or 2 people approving it. And something else. Okay, Bamboo. So in Bamboo, they had this huge VMware machine. I put lots and lots of local agents on it, so they would build in parallel. And then every branch created in BitBucket, we could have a build for that branch. So every developer doing the push, we had a build that would say in the pull request, or also send them an email if there was a problem, and also say if it was successful in the pull request so that the reviewers could know that at least the compilation has been successfully completed. Of course, there was a different plan for the integration branch, the staging branch. Everywhere where I could automatically deploy, for example, staging, if the build was successful, there's no reason why it shouldn't be deployed. It shouldn't be manual, so everything that could be automatic was automatic. But the release managers did want to have some control over production and pre-production deployments, so there were some manual steps. In Bamboo, they have this mechanism called deployment projects. Basically, it takes a build, and then you can deploy to multiple environments. The thing is, as I just mentioned, when the release managers and testers wanted to deploy to production, they wanted to have like some checks and balances in between. They wanted to deploy some servers, wait, check, and then deploy some others. And this deployment was just useless for it. On the other hand, when developers wanted to deploy their development branch on one of the development servers, they had like 4 or 5, then we used every development server was an environment, and they could deploy any of the feature branches they chose to any of the servers they chose, and this is a good scenario for this. As I explained before, you could set stages as manual, and then everything would go automatic up to this point, and then it would wait, and a person would have to go here and say, okay, I want to continue this build, and it would click this button, and the build would continue. So this was very useful for the production deployments. As the Git tags, we had to send the jars and the vars to Artifactory so that other teams in the company would be able to take those and use them for their products that they integrated with. But actually for the builds and deployments inside of Bamboo, there was no reason to use an outside server like Artifactory to push and pull from. That was just useless because Bamboo has its own internal artifact sharing. It it saves artifacts of every build, and you can use those artifacts later for deployments or for other builds. And the nice thing is that, as I already showed a couple of slides, these products are integrated, so you have things like in a pull request, you can see the Jira and the builds. You can also click them and see the list. In Bamboo, you can see the Jira, you can click this and see the Jira. Okay? So this is, for example, a build project for one of the feature branches. You can see the feature branch here. You can see a list of all the branches that you have in BitBucket, because every one of them has its own automatic plan. Okay, and next step. I had to, well, it's a checkpoint, so it's an enterprise. I had to teach people, and there was quite a lot of people, like 50 of them, who needed to learn Git, and they needed to know all of these systems, Bamboo and BitBucket, and how to use this with Jira and everything. So I developed the training. Unfortunately, many people didn't want to attend this training, so the class was like half empty. But eventually, we did cover all of these topics. I also didn't know about like good technical training materials that I should have learned before. So when I did this training, a lot of people still left with a lot of questions and unknowns. One of the lessons that we did was a workshop when I would challenge the developers to, for example, do an action in their Eclipse or do an action with source tree, like clone from Git. And then I would give them some time, 5 minutes, and for those that successfully did it, great. For those that didn't successfully did it, I would show how it's done. And we did this spaced 5 minutes training workshop, and it was very, very successful. A lot of people came up to me and says, well, I actually learned something today because of this. I don't know something, you asked me to do something I don't know, and then you showed it. But it was a lot of talk. It was like 3 days of training, and the people and the managers said, okay, so people now know Git, they should use it. And actually they did start to use it the following week.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Did you use multiple build types? I mean, like Gradle, Maven, and Web, and Java. And,
well,
I mean, how was the integration between Bamboo and the different environment that people were developing in? Assuming there were multiple teams.
Fortunately for me, they all used JBoss, they all used Maven, and they all used Eclipse. They didn't have multiple, like one of them would use IntelliJ and another one would use something else. They also all use Windows. So there was a very set of tools,
homogeneous
fixed set of tools. Yeah. So it made my job easier. I did meet other big companies that did have Gradle and Maven and IntelliJ and Eclipse, and usually what I find in those environments is that people don't tend to learn the tools at all. They don't care. They say, well, it's someone else's job. So,
but the integration between the Bamboo and the deployment system, it was
I'll
always
show
Artifactory and Java.
I'll show you deployment in a second.
Training was for developers, or
No, it was mostly teaching a team of about 20, 30, 40 developers. And they did not use Git before, yes. There are many companies. I'm sorry, I don't really have time for questions. You feel free to come up to me later. So one of the things I had to give them, because again, it was completely new knowledge to them, is learning aids. So one of these things I would say, okay, so we decided that this is the release checklist. This is the way we do releases, okay? So I gave them this checklist. If you're a developer, you should know that this is what happens to your code, okay? And this was extremely useful for the release people and QA people. This would actually go and show them how the production build is being rolled out. So there's a build of the production code. I changed the server names. This is the deployment to the pre-production environment. There's a pause here that says you, the release manager, you, the QA tester, will decide when you want to start this deployment, and all of this will go automatically from there. And once this is finished, there's an automatic preparation of the first batch of production service deployment, which I will wait for you, and you will tell me, like, not me, Bamboo. You will tell Bamboo when you're ready to proceed at each of these points. As I said, the deployment projects of Bamboo were not very useful for this. So the production build was actually several of plans in Bamboo, each of them looking like this with houses. And now that they have this and they can iterate and they all can understand the decisions being made, it was much easier for them to understand. If I see a failure here, what happened? So they actually know what happened. This git command failed, and they know that the git guy they should fetch him and ask him what's it about. Okay, and now I have one small last thing, right? Don't have much time? 2 minutes. Great, last thing. So I showed the deployment pipeline, right? We talked about version control and builds, and they don't do unit tests yet, even though I did teach them. They have like the Selenium stuff that they're building, which is not yet complete. The deployment and the deployment to production. What about this measure and validate? This is extremely important. When you deploy to production, you want to know that the deployment went well. If it failed on its face right away, great. You know that it's failed. But what if it didn't fail? It worked, but it didn't really work. The production doesn't really work. So I added a couple of things because I had more time when I was supporting them and they didn't ask me enough questions about Git. I installed a log aggregation system that they had a lot of servers, as you maybe noticed. And of course, the developers would not go into the servers and like look at the logs with rep or less or whatever. So I decided I would ask the IT guys for a server, put Kibana on it, and aggregate all the logs of all the GA bosses. They have like 20 servers of different environments into this dashboard. And they have actually never seen their errors before, at least not in JBoss, because JBoss was also part of the new migration system. So now they actually saw things. They saw they have errors. They saw what kind of errors they have. They saw the things that didn't work even though the deployment did succeed. And there's also one thing called SonarQube, which is a aggregation of all kinds of static analysis results. Static analysis can tell you if you are writing code that is syntactically correct, so Eclipse would not tell it to you that this code is incorrect. It would not say, okay, fine. But actually there's a bug in it. So for example, this is how Kibana looks like. It's not their Kibana, it's just the random Kibana I found. It can show you amounts on a histogram. It can show you various graphs and charts that you can split to show you the amount of errors versus the amount of info messages, and you can see the messages themselves. And this is how SonarQube looks like. You have a list of issues. You can filter them by severity, by rules, etc., etc. This is not their issues. This is just random from the internet. And for example, you can see equality tests should not be made with floating point values. For example, if you did 1.00 equal 1.00, it would not actually work in most languages because floating point doesn't work that way. So it shows you that there's a critical bug here and you should look at it. You can click this arrow button, it will actually show you the code. And we found a plugin both for Bamboo and for BitBucket that would show these in the pull requests. The only problem is that SonarQube takes about 40 minutes to run, so I'm doing that in a separate job. But eventually they get the That's it. Right now they're very happy with what they got, and I'm very happy. Thank you everyone for listening to me. If you have questions, I'll be around